Hello guys, and welcome to a quiet journey through history. Tonight, I will tell you a long, gentle story to help you drift into sleep. Close your eyes and imagine a world slowly changing many years ago. You are warm and safe in your bed, far removed from that turbulent time, but I will guide you there softly in your mind's eye. We'll move slowly, step by step, through the events, like turning the pages of a history book, very gently. Imagine it is the early 1000s, 930s, and you are in a country in the heart of Europe, Germany. The air is still and a bit cool, as dawn is just breaking. In the distance, you hear the faint sounds of a city stirring awake. This is a time of great change in Germany. The people have faced economic hardship and political turmoil. Out of this unrest, a new leader has risen, Adolf Hitler, who becomes the Chancellor of Germany in January 1933. He leads the National Socialist Party known as the Nazis. His speeches are passionate and full of anger and promise. He tells the public that he will restore Germany's pride and strength. Many people, desperate for hope, are willing to believe him. Now, in this calm narration, we will explore how, under Hitler's rule, a vast system of camps slowly took shape. At first, it started in a small, makeshift way. Picture a quiet scene in March 1933 on the outskirts of a town called Dachau, not far from Munich. There is an empty old factory building. It stands silent behind barbed wire fences, with a few armed guards in brown uniforms pacing back and forth outside. This is one of the first Nazi concentration camps, set up just weeks after Hitler took power. It has been created to hold people the new government considers enemies or threats. In these early days of Nazi rule, the camps are not yet the huge network they will later become. They are relatively small and improvised. The Nazi authorities, especially the stormtroopers of the SA, Sturmabteilung, and local police, begin rounding up individuals they distrust. They focus on political opponents, communists, socialists, trade union leaders, liberals, anyone who spoke out against Nazi ideas. Instead of normal arrest and a fair trial, these people are simply taken into protective custody and sent to places like the Dachau camp. The word concentration camp is used because it is a place to concentrate, gather together detainees away from society. Life in Germany is changing quietly but firmly. Each day, new rules limit freedom. Opponents of the regime disappear into prisons. And these newly formed camps, the public does not know much about these places yet, but rumors start to spread. Imagine hearing whispers in a cafe about someone's neighbor who was taken away by the police for questioning and never came back. People lower their voices and glance around fearfully. The atmosphere is one of uncertainty and quiet dread. By the middle of 1933, several makeshift camps have sprung up across Germany. They are often located in old warehouses, abandoned factories, or in remote rural locations, wherever space is available to hold prisoners. For example, in northern Germany's Emsland region, authorities established camps in the desolate peat bogs. Political prisoners are sent there to perform hard labor digging turf from the marshy ground. In one such camp, named Borgermoor, a group of prisoners even composes a mournful song called the Peat Bog Soldiers, for which they softly sing among themselves as a form of protest and solidarity, lamenting their endless marching and digging in the mire. In another early camp at Oranienburg, just outside Berlin, SA men take over a disused brewery to hold and brutalize Social Democrats, Jews, and other targets. Local residents see detainees being paraded through the streets under guard. Each locale has its own cruel, improvised routine, but all share the goal of breaking the spirit of those inside. However, these early camps do not yet have a centralized, standardized system. They are run by different groups, SA stormtroopers, local police, or improvised civilian vigilantes, in various parts of the country, with different rules and levels of brutality in each place. This changes in 1934. In June of that year, Heinrich Himmler, the leader of a rival elite Nazi force called the SS Schutzstaffel, recognizable by their black uniforms, takes control of the camps. The SS, which is fiercely loyal to Hitler, wants to run the camps with strict discipline and efficiency. Himmler appoints a ruthless officer Theodor Eicke, who had been commandant of Dachau, to help reorganize all camps under a central inspectorate of concentration camps. Now imagine the scene at Dachau as Eicke imposes his new rules. The morning air is cold as a bell rings before sunrise. Prisoners must jump out of their bunks immediately. They scramble to line up inside the barracks for inspection. Eicke has issued a detailed disciplinary and penal code for prisoners, a manual listing severe punishments for even the smallest acts of disobedience. This code allows guards to whip prisoners, to confine them to dark standing cells, or to execute them for attempts to escape. Under Eicke's guidelines, prisoners lose any remaining rights. They are completely at the mercy of the camp staff. Dachau, with Eicke's Iron Regiment, becomes a model camp, a blueprint that the SS will use as it sets up more camps in the coming years. Gradually, the SA and police-run camps are shut down or absorbed, and the SS takes over completely. By 1935, the camps have secured central funding from the Reich government, no longer relying on local authorities, ensuring they're permanent. In the years 1936 to 1939, the SS builds several large permanent concentration camps. These camps are usually in isolated areas, away from city centres, often enclosed by high fences and watchtowers. Sachsenhausen opens in 1936 north of Berlin, Buchenwald in 1937 in central Germany, Flossenburg in 1938 in Bavaria, Mauthausen in 1938 in annexed Austria, and in 1939 Ravensbrück opens a special camp just for women prisoners. Dachau itself, opened in 1933, remains in operation throughout and continues to serve as a training ground for camp guards and command. Each new camp follows the Dachau template: regimented barracks, roll call squares, forced labor workshops, and a cadre of SS Death's Head guards, SS men with skull insignia on their collars, running every aspect with brutal discipline. During these years before the war, the Nazis also expand the range of people they imprison. Nazi ideology, Hitler's set of beliefs, teaches that German society must be purified of certain elements. This does not only mean removing political opponents. The Nazis believe in a racist hierarchy of humanity. They view Jews as the main enemy and source of Germany's problems. They consider Roma, gypsies, to be racially inferior and prone to crime. They regard disabled people as life unworthy of life. They see homosexuals as degenerate and a threat to their ideal of family values. They label many other individuals as assholes, a broad term that can include the homeless, beggars, alcoholics, sex workers, or anyone who doesn't fit into Nazi norms of behavior. The camps begin to receive this wider variety of prisoners alongside political detainees. Imagine the quiet processing office at a camp in the late 1000s 930s. A new prisoner arrives under guard. An SS camp clerk sits at a desk with stacks of forms and a pile of coloured fabric badges. Each prisoner is registered and then assigned a coloured triangle patch to wear on their uniform, indicating their category. A red triangle is for political prisoners, communists, social democrats, other opponents of the regime. A green triangle marks professional criminals, often working class men who had been repeat offenders in ordinary crimes. A purple triangle is given to Jehovah's Witnesses, a religious group whose members refuse to salute Hitler or serve in the army because of their faith. A pink triangle is for men accused under paragraph 175 de facto, the law against homosexuality, thus marking homosexual prisoners. A black triangle is used for asocials, a label that could include homeless people, beggars, or others the Nazis deemed socially undesirable. Later, some Roma and Sinti gypsy prisoners are given black triangles, or sometimes brown ones. A yellow triangle, often arranged to form a Star of David, is used for Jewish prisoners, sometimes in combination with another colour if the person is both Jewish and another category. For example, a Jewish political prisoner might wear a red and yellow overlapping badge. Each person who comes through the camp gates is now labelled with one of these symbols. It is a cold, bureaucratic way of stripping away their identity and reducing them to a category. Immediately upon arrival at most camps, new prisoners are forced to surrender their civilian clothes and all personal belongings. Their heads are often shaved bald, ostensibly to prevent lice, but also to remove another piece of personal identity and dignity. The prisoners are issued rough camp uniforms, typically a coarse cotton outfit with blue and grey stripes, the classic zebra stripes, though not all camps had identical patterns. Men are given a striped cap, jacket and trousers. Women receive a smock-like striped dress or shirt and skirt. Everyone wears crude wooden clogs or tattered shoes, often without socks, seeing themselves suddenly with no hair, dressed in these ragged, identical outfits. Many prisoners feel a shock of humiliation and despair. They scarcely recognize themselves. This uniform, combined with the number and triangle patch, marks the final step in erasing their former identity. They are no longer fathers or mothers, students or merchants. In the eyes of the SS, they have become only a number, a piece of camp inventory. This system of classification has real effects on daily survival. SS guards and even prisoner functionaries often show particular cruelty to certain groups. Jewish prisoners, for instance, endure some of the worst abuse. They are frequently given the most dangerous, exhausting work and are singled out for beatings. Polish and Soviet prisoners, whom Nazi ideology also deems racially inferior, suffer brutally as well, especially Soviet prisoners of war, thousands of whom are taken to camps from 1941 onward and often die within weeks from deliberate starvation or outright execution. On the other hand, German prisoners, particularly those who are not Jewish and were sent to camp for political or criminal reasons, sometimes have a slightly higher chance of survival. They speak the language of the guards and, as noted, many of the prisoner functionary positions, capos, block elders, are given to German prisoners, which gives them access to slightly better food or shelter at the expense of their fellow inmates. Nationality plays a role too. As the Nazi regime expands and later wages war, the camps fill with people from nearly every country under German occupation. By the early 1940s, one might encounter a Polish prisoner next to a French prisoner, a Dutch next to a Czech, all struggling to communicate. Language barriers can cause confusion, but prisoners improvise ways to understand each other through gestures, bits of broken German, or the few words of each other's languages they pick up. There is often camaraderie among those who share a mother tongue or background. For example, Polish prisoners in some camps form support networks, as do German political prisoners among themselves. Occasionally, national tensions flare. The Nazis sometimes play groups against each other, but in the face of extreme hardship, many inmates of diverse origins learn to cooperate in small ways, recognizing their common humanity in a place designed to strip it away. Let's step inside the camp for a moment and look at daily life through a prisoner's eyes. Inmates' daily routines are monotonous, but also utterly draining, with torture and abuse never far. The day usually begins around 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning, perhaps an hour later in winter, when a piercing whistle or bell shatters the pre-dawn darkness. In long wooden barracks, hundreds of prisoners rouse themselves from thin straw mattresses. They slept in their uniforms, crowded sometimes 2 or 3 to a bunk, pressed against each other for a little warmth. All around is the sound of weary bodies stirring, coughing. Many have chronic coughs from disease, perhaps a muffled groan or whimper. But no time can be wasted. At the instant of wake-up, everyone must jump to their feet. If you linger or move too slowly, a capo or guard might storm in and hit you. First comes the scramble to the latrine and washroom. Imagine a dim, cold washroom with a long trough of cold water and a few spigots. Hundreds of prisoners have perhaps 10 minutes to use these facilities. There is no soap, no towel. People shove and jostle to splash a bit of water on their faces or to relieve themselves quickly in the filthy latrine trench. The smells of human waste and disinfection are sharp. Anyone who doesn't complete this hurried washing and cleaning ritual in time might be beaten. Prisoners then rush back to their bunks to tidy the barracks. A bizarre expectation in these conditions, but the SS demand it. Straw mattresses must be smoothed, blankets folded crisply, the floor might even be swept, or the mud scraped off shoes. The prisoners do their best with trembling hands and on empty stomachs. If breakfast is given at all, it is something meager and barely warm. Often it's just a cup of ersatz coffee, a bitter roasted grain drink with no milk or sugar, or a thin broth. Solid food in the morning is rare, maybe a small crust of bread saved from the previous evening. Many skip eating to have a moment more to prepare for roll call, hiding any morsel of bread in their clothes to nibble later. Soon, the morning roll call is upon them. Prisoners must assemble outside on the Appellplatz, the wide open yard, typically while it's still dark or just at dawn's first light. They line up in rows of 10, shivering in the cold or already sweating in the summer heat, standing at attention in their striped uniforms. An SS officer, or the Lagerführer, camp leader, and a team of guards walk among the rows. They count and count again, comparing to the camp records. This ritual can last a very long time, sometimes hours, if the numbers don't match or if the commandant feels like tormenting the inmates. Everyone must remain absolutely still, silent, hats off out of respect to the presence of the SS, they say. The wind might be biting, or rain might start to fall, but woe to the prisoner who moves or scratches or coughs without permission. During roll calls, the bodies of any prisoners who died during the night are brought out and laid in front of the lineup to be counted as well. It's not uncommon to see a few blanketed forms on the ground, which were once people who simply expired from illness or exhaustion. In the dark hours before dawn, the atmosphere is tense and silent, except for the barking of orders and the crunching of boots on gravel. At one end of the roll call ground there might be a gallows or whipping post, a constant grim reminder of the punishments that await. If anyone is missing, perhaps someone died unnoticed, or someone is unconscious in the barracks, or in the rare event someone escaped during the night, the count is repeated again and again until it tallies. This means prisoners could be left standing at attention indefinitely. If a prisoner collapses from weakness during appel, guards or capos drag them out of the ranks. That unfortunate person may be beaten on the spot or later punished severely, even killed for disrupting the count. Sometimes roll call is used to mete out public punishment. All prisoners might be forced to watch. As an example is made, a prisoner who tried to escape or stole a piece of bread may be called forward. Perhaps they are flogged with a cane, while everyone must stand witness. Or perhaps they are hanged on the gallows in front of the assembled camp, a terrorizing spectacle that the Nazi guards used to deter others from even thinking of defiance. The other prisoners, exhausted and hungry, are forced to stand still and watch, internalizing the message that mercy will not be found here. After what can feel like an eternity, the morning roll call concludes. Next, work details are organized. The sun is now peeking over the barracks, and a new day of forced labor begins. Prisoners are divided into commandos, work crews, each supervised by capos and guards. Some will remain inside the camp, cleaning the grounds, working in the kitchens, or maintaining facilities, but most will be marched out of the camp gates to labor sites. They march in columns, often with an SS guard at the head barking the marching cadence. Perhaps a harmonica or accordion is played and the prisoners are ordered to sing marching songs, sometimes nonsensical songs or ones that mock them purely to entertain the guards. Despite sheer fatigue from poor sleep and little food, prisoners must keep pace. If someone stumbles or lags, the nearest guard or capo might strike them with a stick or rifle butt. The marching itself can be several kilometers if the workplace is far. Those who cannot keep up are dealt with brutally. A prisoner who collapses en route might be kicked to their feet, and if they truly cannot continue, they might be shot and left by the roadside. What kind of work do they do? It varies by camp and by the needs of the moment. In some camps, prisoners break rocks in quarries or carry heavy stones. Mountain Camp in Austria, for instance, is notorious for its stone quarry. There is a long, steep staircase carved into the rock, later nicknamed the Stairs of Death. Prisoners are forced to carry massive granite boulders up these 186 steps. Many collapse under the weight and tumble down, knocking others over like dominoes, sometimes dying in the fall. SS guards at the top, sometimes cruelly push an exhausted prisoner, sending them and their stone crashing below. In other camps, work might mean digging ditches, laying bricks, draining swamps, or constructing new camp buildings. As the German economy gears up for war, more and more prisoners are used in armaments production or other war industry. At some camps, like Buchenwald or Sachsenhausen, inmates work in on-site workshops and factories, making bricks, forging tools, or assembling parts. At Dachau, there are SS-run workshops where prisoners manufacture furniture or Monowitz, Auschwitz III. Prisoners slave in a giant chemical plant attempting to produce synthetic rubber for the war effort. No matter the task, the conditions are designed to wear the prisoners down. They work long hours, often from sun up to sundown. They are rarely given proper tools. Many tasks are done with bare hands or inadequate equipment. Guards and capos yell constantly, enforcing a pace few can manage. Around noon, there might be a brief lunch break, sometimes not. If a midday meal is provided, the prisoners might receive a ladle of thin soup. Imagining this soup, though, one should not think of anything hearty. It is essentially hot water with perhaps a few turnip peels, cabbage leaves, or potato skins floating in it. Yet for starving prisoners, those bits of vegetable are precious. They will scoop out every drop. Some so weak can barely lift the tin bowl to their lips, and after 10 or 15 minutes, the break is over and it's back to work. Throughout the day, the prisoners are under constant surveillance. An SS guard with a rifle and dog might patrol the perimeter of a work site. If it's a factory floor, capos roam among the inmate laborers, ready to hit anyone who pauses or falters. Accidents are common: collapsing scaffolds, explosions, machinery injuries, and rarely is any care given. The injured may simply be dragged away, perhaps to the camp infirmary, which is poorly equipped, or left to die. Human life is terribly cheap in the eyes of the camp overlords. And yet, even amid this manufactured hell, traces of the ordinary world occasionally reach the prisoners. A bird might perch on the fence and sing briefly before flying off. The sun could break through the clouds in the late afternoon and cast a golden light over the camp, warming a prisoner's face for a moment. From beyond the perimeter, maybe the scent of pine trees or fresh rain on grass wafts in. These small, natural moments do not change anything. But for some prisoners, they offer a second of mental escape. A reminder that a world still exists beyond the barbed wire. A beautiful world of normalcy and nature, however unreachable it seems at the moment. As evening approaches, the work crews are marched back to the camp. If it's winter, darkness may already be closing in by the time they return. The prisoners are utterly exhausted, their legs like lead, stomachs gnawing with hunger. But the day is not done. There is another roll call in the evening, just as strict as the mornings. Once again, everyone assembles on the Appellplatz in neat rows. The guards count to ensure no one is missing. Those who died during the day, perhaps someone who collapsed at work and was carted back on a wagon, are placed before the assembled ranks to be counted among the dead. This roll call, too, can be mercilessly prolonged. If the numbers don't add up, prisoners might stand there for an hour, 2 hours, all after a full day of labor. Sometimes, as a punishment for something, say an escape attempt by someone, or simply the caprice of the commandant, the entire camp is made to stand at attention far into the night. There are accounts of prisoners forced to stay on the roll call ground for 12 or 18 hours straight. People faint and die where they stand. Most roll calls aren't that extreme, but even a normal one can last well over an hour, which, in pouring rain or freezing wind, feels like eternity. At last, they are dismissed back to their barracks. Night falls. This is the brief period of relative rest or free time in the camp, often just an hour or two before lights out. What do prisoners do in this time? Many immediately attend to basic survival needs. They might quietly barter with each other, trading a portion of bread for a scrap of cloth to wrap a foot, or a spoonful of margarine for help mending a shirt. Some use the time to scavenge, maybe picking undigested pieces out of the thin soup if they work in the kitchen, or searching the barrack straw for an extra overlooked potato peel. Those who have the strength might attempt to wash their striped clothes, which are invariably dirty and lice-ridden, or patch a torn sleeve with threads drawn from a blanket. Community and camaraderie can appear in these moments. A prisoner might help his neighbor by picking lice from his shirt seams, or a small group might huddle and quietly share memories or even a joke to keep spirits up. In the women's camp, perhaps an older prisoner soothes younger ones by stroking their shorn heads or humming a lullaby very softly. Food is distributed. The main evening meal, typically each prisoner receives a small chunk of black bread, maybe 5 or 6 ounces, and perhaps a spoonful of some topping like watery margarine, a slice of artificial sausage, or a dab of jam. Often this bread is expected to last for both dinner and the next morning's breakfast. Many consume it immediately, despite intending to save some. Hunger is a dominant force. It gnaws constantly. There are prisoners who wolf down their ration as soon as they get it, and others who, with great willpower, nibble tiny pieces and tie the rest in a cloth to hide for later. Tragically, the starving body sometimes leads one to make poor choices. Some might eat their whole 2-day ration at once, unable to resist, and then have nothing for tomorrow morning. Night in the barracks is a time of relative quiet, but not peace. The doors are locked from the outside. In the dark or under dim light bulbs, the bunks are filled with aching, bone-tired figures. There is the sound of coughing. Tuberculosis and other illnesses are rampant. The whimpers of those who have nightmares or fevers, perhaps muffled sobbing from someone in despair. Personal space is virtually non-existent. Prisoners sleep, 2 or 3 to a narrow bunk, limbs entwined. If one turns, all must turn. The straw mattress is often infested with lice and fleas that bite through the night. Many prisoners have dysentery, a severe intestinal illness, and struggle to control their diarrhea. The effort to reach the bucket or latrine in time in darkness often fails, adding to the filth and smell. Yet, there might also be the tiniest semblance of normality. Perhaps 2 friends whisper quietly about their homes, recalling warm memories to momentarily escape their reality. Someone else silently prays, thanking God for surviving one more day. Another might take a stub of pencil, if they've managed to hide one, and a bit of scavenged paper to jot down a few lines of a diary, knowing it could cost them their life if found, but needing to assert their existence in writing. These small acts of humanity, comforting a bunkmate, sharing a secret story, saying a prayer, writing a poem on stolen paper, are rays of light in the encompassing darkness. By 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, lights must be out. An oppressive stillness comes over the camp, broken occasionally by a distant shout from a guard or the bark of an SS dog on patrol. Searchlights from the watchtowers sweep over the open areas, catching drifting particles in their beams. The prisoners, in their crowded bunks, slip into fitful sleep. For some, dreams may bring them back to their families or homes, only to awaken to the grim barracks a daily heartbreak. Others are so exhausted that they sleep like stones despite the discomfort. And some cannot sleep much at all. They lie awake, staring into the darkness, too hungry or anxious or sick to rest. This has been a picture of a single day in a concentration camp, and such days repeat over and over. The routine of roll calls, forced labor, brutal punishments, meager meals, and stifling barracks remains largely the same through the months and years, only interrupted by moments of even worse violence, or by the rare changes such as new transports of prisoners arriving or transfers to other camps. There is a saying among some prisoners, each day in camp feels like a year. Time blurs, many lose track of the date, and even the year, as one season bleeds into the next. Survival becomes the only focus, enduring until the next day, the next week, finding any way to keep going. Throughout this routine, the SS guards and commanders maintain an appearance of total control. The camp is their own little universe, where normal laws and morals do not apply. From the outside, if a person was standing on a hill at dawn, looking at the camp, they might see a seemingly orderly place, prisoners lined up, marching out in rows, guards saluting their officers, but all of it is upheld by terror and unimaginable suffering hidden behind the barbed wire. Still, even in these awful early years of the camp system, the death toll is comparatively modest next to what is to come. People are indeed dying, from beatings, from disease, from being worked to death, but the camps at this stage are primarily instruments of repression and punishment, not yet centers of mass extermination. That horrific transformation is on the horizon. By 1937, 1938, the Nazi regime is growing more radical. In November 1938, a nationwide pogrom called Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, erupts. Nazi paramilitaries and mobs attack Jewish synagogues, shops, and homes across Germany and Austria, smashing and burning. In its aftermath, about 30,000 Jewish men are arrested in a single sweep and sent to camps like Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. This sudden influx of prisoners overwhelms the camp system. These Jewish detainees are treated with exceptional brutality, forced to stand for endless roll calls in freezing weather, beaten incessantly. Hundreds die in the following weeks from the abuse and cold. Most of these particular prisoners are released after a few months. The Nazis cynically offer to free them if they prove they can emigrate quickly, essentially ransoming them out of Germany. But the message is clear. The camps have now become a weapon against the Jewish population as well, a prelude to far worse to come. Now the year 1939 arrives. In September, Nazi Germany invades Poland, igniting World War II. The camp system, which began as a domestic tool of terror, will expand like never before under the cover of war. The German army's swift victories in Poland and later across Western Europe give the SS new territories and countless new victims for their camps. The war marks the transition of the concentration camps into a fully developed engine of slave labor and eventually genocide. As German forces occupied Poland, they quickly set up camps and prisons there to subjugate the population. Auschwitz is established in 1940 in occupied Poland, initially to hold Polish political prisoners and intellectuals whom the Nazis view as potential resistance leaders. In fact, throughout occupied Poland, the Nazis shoot or imprison teachers, priests, community leaders, anyone who might inspire opposition. Many of these Polish prisoners end up in Auschwitz or other camps like Stutthof and Majdanek. The camps, which once held mostly Germans and Austrians, now begin filling with people from all over Europe as Nazi conquests grow. In Western Europe, the camps receive resistance fighters, forced laborers who misbehaved, or people the Nazis accuse of sabotage. In Eastern Europe, entire swathes of the population are targeted, not only resistance members, but also random civilians picked up in reprisals, Jews from ghettos, to be discussed in a moment, Roma families rounded up from villages, and Soviet prisoners of war by the tens of thousands. The camp system becomes extensive. By the height of the war, there are main camps and hundreds of sub-camps scattered across German-occupied territory. Camps like Auschwitz in Poland, Buchenwald in Germany, Gross-Rosen in Silesia, Natzweiler-Struthof in France, Ravensbrück in Germany, and Stutthof in Poland become centers of huge networks of subsidiary camps. The SS establishes these sub-camps near factories, mines, or construction sites to supply industries with slave labor. The names of camps seem to extend across the map of Europe. Dachau, Sachsenhausen, and Oranienburg in Germany, Mauthausen and Gusen in Austria, Westerbork and Vaart in the Netherlands, Breendonk in Belgium, Drancy in France, Fort 7 in Poland, Jasenovac in Croatia, to name but a few. Over the course of the war, the Nazis set up tens of thousands of camps and ghettos of various sizes and purposes. Each location has its stories of torment and sometimes small acts of courage. Together, they form a vast landscape of suffering that stretches from the Atlantic to the Russian front. With war, the demand for forced labor in the German war economy skyrockets. Able-bodied camp prisoners are now seen as a valuable workforce to be exploited until they die. The SS, under Himmler's direction, essentially turns the camp system into a slave labor empire. They even rent out prisoners to private companies and state projects. An official rate might be charged. For example, a factory might pay a few marks a day for each inmate, a fee that goes to the SS, but the prisoner himself, of course, receives nothing and is worked mercilessly. Especially after Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, when labor shortages become acute, the Nazis intensify the use of camp inmates in armaments production. For instance, consider Mittelbau-Dora, a camp in central Germany established to build the top-secret V-2 rockets, the advanced long-range missiles the Nazis developed. Their prisoners were forced to toil deep in underground tunnels dug into a mountain. The conditions defy imagination. The tunnels are cold, damp, and filled with machine dust and toxic fumes. Prisoners work 12-hour shifts in dim light, assembling rockets or hauling heavy machinery, all while suffering from hunger and abuse. They rarely see daylight. Thousands died in these tunnels from accidents, exhaustion, and outright executions. In fact, more people died producing these V-2 rockets as slave laborers than were killed by the rockets themselves when the Germans fired them at Allied cities. A grim testament to how the Nazi regime expended human life for war production. Even as prisoners become more valuable as workers, their living conditions do not improve. In fact, with the war's pressures, conditions in many camps get worse. Food rations are cut further as general shortages hit Germany. Overcrowding intensifies. Existing camps like Auschwitz and Buchenwald expand far beyond their intended capacity, and new prisoners pour in from occupied countries. In 1942 alone, the camp population soars. With overcrowding comes catastrophic sanitation breakdowns. Lice infestations lead to typhus epidemics that kill thousands. The SS response is not to improve hygiene much, but often to let epidemics run their course or to kill sick prisoners en masse, to prevent spread or simply because they can't work. By 1943-1944, the camps are deeply integrated into the Nazi war machine. 2/3 of all camp inmates are engaged in war labor. Yet paradoxically, the death rates in the camps climb higher than ever. The Nazis are literally working people to death faster than ever before. In the second half of 1942, for example, in some camps, nearly half the prisoners admitted died within a few months. The SS would then simply bring in new prisoners from new arrests or occupied populations to replace the dead. In the Nazi mindset, prisoners are expendable, a disposable workforce. A chilling routine develops. Each time a batch of prisoners is worked or starved to death, another transport arrives to replenish the labor pool. It is a human conveyor belt of suffering. All the while, parallel to the expansion of the concentration camps, another kind of camp emerges, one with an even darker purpose. Starting in 1942, the Nazis begin establishing extermination camps, often referred to as death camps or killing centers. These are facilities designed not for labor or detention, but solely for mass murder, primarily of Jews, as part of what the Nazis call the final solution of the Jewish question, their plan to annihilate the Jewish people of Europe. It happens gradually but decisively. In the summer of 1941, Hitler's armies invade the Soviet Union, and with them travel special SS killing squads called Einsatzgruppen. These squads start shooting tens of thousands of Jews in occupied Soviet territories, burying them in mass graves. But Nazi leaders find this method, mass shootings, to be psychologically taxing for the shooters and too public. They seek a more efficient and secret method. By late 1941, experiments with poison gas, already used in small scale at some camps to kill ill prisoners, and in the euthanasia program against disabled people, are expanded. The first extermination camp, Chelmno, Kulmhof, in occupied Poland, begins operation in December 1941. Its method, mobile gas vans. There, Jews from nearby towns and the Lodz ghetto are loaded into sealed trucks. The engine exhaust is redirected inside, and as the van drives to a burial area in the woods, the people inside are asphyxiated by carbon monoxide. When the doors are opened, the victims, men, women, children, are dead, and special teams of camp prisoners unload the bodies into mass graves. It's a harrowing assembly line process of murder, but it is only the precursor to even larger killing centers. In January 1942, high-ranking Nazi officials meet at a villa in Berlin at the Wannsee Conference. There, over a calm discussion with breakfast and cognac, they coordinate the logistics of the final solution, how to transport millions of Jews to their deaths, and how to involve various state agencies in this task. Shortly after, the Nazis build or convert several camps in occupied Poland into pure extermination facilities as part of Operation Reinhard, the code name for the plan to eliminate the roughly 2 million Jews in the general government, occupied Polish territory. In 1942, Belzak, Sobibor and Treblinka camps begin operation. These places have no other purpose than killing. They are relatively small, no need for large prisoner barracks since almost no one is intended to live there long. Instead, they have specially constructed gas chambers and burial pits. Let's take Treblinka on a hot August day in 1942. A train from Warsaw has arrived, crammed with Jewish families from the Warsaw ghetto. They have been packed, 100 people to a cattle car for days, suffocating and dehydrated. Now the doors slide open to blinding sunlight and yelling guards. SS men and Ukrainian auxiliaries with rifles and whips force the disoriented prisoners out. Piles of luggage are left on the platform. The people are told to leave everything, that they won't need their belongings where they're going. Many still believe the deceitful explanation that they are merely at a transit camp en route to resettlement in the east. They see a sign that falsely indicates showers and a canteen. Men are ordered to separate from women and children. Families hastily hug and say tearful goodbyes, confused and frightened but still unaware of what is to come. The SS shouting reaches a fever pitch. Schnell, faster, strip, everyone must bathe and be disinfected. The women and children are corralled to an undressing barracks. Mothers cling to crying babies, old women lean on trembling legs. They all remove their clothing as commanded, trying to maintain some modesty, or console a child who doesn't understand why mummy's taking off her dress. They fold their garments and shoes neatly because the guards bark orders to remember exactly where they put their things, a cruel ploy to maintain the illusion that they will retrieve them later. Meanwhile, the men are forced to undress in a separate yard. Some of the strongest men are pulled aside and told they've been selected for work. In reality, these few will become the Sonderkommando, forced to assist in the killing process temporarily. Now, the naked men, women and children are driven down a fenced path. The SS euphemistically call it the Himmelstrasse, or Road to Heaven, but prisoners later nickname it the Tube, a narrow camouflaged corridor leading straight to the gas chambers. The gas chamber building itself is a low concrete structure, perhaps looking a bit like a bathhouse. Some victims, in terror and confusion, might still cling to the hope that it truly is a shower as advertised. Inside, it's dim. The chambers are empty rooms, with metal pipes, non-functioning, to resemble shower heads. The unsuspecting are packed in, shoulder to shoulder, dozens upon dozens of people, in a space the size of a garage. An SS man or Ukrainian guard crams in as many as possible and then forces the heavy door shut, spinning a lock wheel to seal it. Outside, an engine, often a repurposed tank or truck engine, is turned on. The engine's exhaust is channeled through pipes into the chamber. Back inside that room, panic quickly replaces any hope. The smell of exhaust and the lack of oxygen make people scream, cough, claw at the walls. In the darkness, mothers hold their children tightly. People push and climb over each other instinctively, seeking air. But there is no escape. In about 10 or 15 minutes, it grows quiet. After 20 or 30 minutes, when the engine is switched off and the chamber is ventilated, everyone inside is dead, asphyxiated by carbon monoxide. A few yards away, those Jewish prisoners selected to assist, Sonderkommando, brace themselves. Now they must perform the ghastly task of clearing the gas chambers. They open the heavy door. Out wafts heat and the stench of death. The victims' bodies, many discolored and soiled, tumble out. It's a horrific scene. Often the bodies are entwined in piles with children and smaller adults at the bottom. These work party prisoners themselves, terrified and grief-stricken, have learnt they have no choice but to carry out orders. They use hooks, or just their hands, to drag the corpses out onto carts. Gold teeth are yanked out to be melted down later. Women's hair might be cut off. The Nazis actually saved human hair for use in industrial products. All valuables, wedding rings for example, are collected. Meanwhile, another group of these workers transports the bodies to large pits or to pyres. At Treblinka and Sobibor in the early months, bodies were buried in mass graves. But later, the Nazis exhume and burn them on open-air pyres to destroy the evidence when they begin closing the camps. The entire killing process, from the train's arrival to the disposal of bodies, is designed to take just a few hours. Treblinka at its height could murder approximately 10,000 to 12,000 people in a day and was in almost constant operation through 1942. By the time Treblinka, Sobibor and Belzec finish their grim task, they are closed and dismantled. In 1943, after most Polish Jews have been killed, roughly 1.5 million Jews have been murdered at those three camps alone. Parallel to Operation Reinhard, Auschwitz in occupied Poland has been expanded from a concentration camp into a combined labor camp and killing center, the largest of all. Auschwitz is a complex of camps: Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II Birkenau, and Auschwitz III Monowitz, plus sub-camps. In 1942, the SS begins transporting Jews from all across Europe to Auschwitz II, known as Birkenau, to be killed in newly constructed large gas chambers using a different gas, Zyklon B. Zyklon B is a cyanide-based pesticide in granular form that releases poisonous gas when exposed to air. It had been tested on prisoners at Auschwitz in 1941 and found to be an efficient killing agent. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, they built 4 big crematorium complexes in 1942-43. Each has underground dressing rooms and gas chambers with industrial-scale crematorium ovens nearby. Let's walk through that process calmly. Cattle cars arrive on the rail spur inside Birkenau. Men, women and children from, say, Hungary or Greece, after a harrowing journey, they spill out onto the selection platform, dazed and blinking. SS officers, including the notorious Dr. Josef Mengele in 1944, stand there, elegantly uniformed, casually deciding who shall live for the moment and who will die immediately. A flick of a hand, able-bodied men and some women without small children to one side, this means temporary survival as forced labor, women with children, pregnant women, the elderly, the infirm, to the other side. This means death in the gas chamber. No explanations are given. Perhaps a mother and teenage daughter are separated. A grandfather is sent one way while his adult son is sent another. The victims often don't truly grasp that this separation is fine. They might be told you'll reunite later after showers, one of the many cruel lies. Those marked for death, the majority of most transports, are marched a short distance to the gas chamber building. It's squat with a wide door. They're told to undress for a shower and disinfection. The scene is chaotic, but the SS and their auxiliaries keep it moving with threats and violence. The naked prisoners, trying to cover themselves, are herded into a large chamber that indeed has shower heads, fake ones, in the ceiling. The heavy door is shut, locked, sealed. In the roof, there are openings. An SS man on the roof wearing a gas mask opens Zyklon B canisters and dumps the pellets down shafts into the chamber. Inside, these pellets release prussic acid gas. In a short time, perhaps 10 minutes or so, people begin to lose consciousness and collapse. Within 15 to 20 minutes, almost everyone is dead. The victims' last moments are of panic, but they are relatively brief. Afterwards, huge extractor fans vent out the poisonous air. Then the Sonderkommando teams go to work under SS supervision. They open the doors to a horrifying sight. Piles of bodies tangled together, some bleeding or excreting, often a tinge of pink from the cyanide poisoning. These prisoner workers now have to disentangle and move the bodies. They use metal hooks to pull out the corpses. Try not to look at the faces too closely because sometimes they might recognize a friend or even a family member among them. The corpses are searched. Any gold teeth are pulled and collected in buckets to be melted into bullion. Jewelry removed. The bodies are then loaded into lifts or carried to the ovens in the next room. And then the crematorium ovens, built by a German engineering firm, can burn several bodies at once at high efficiency. Bright orange flames consume body after body. The chimneys belch out thick smoke day and night. Ash piles up. In Auschwitz, it was used as fertilizer on nearby fields, or dumped into the river or marshes. This is mass murder on an industrial scale, carried out step by step, day after day. Trains arrive, people are gassed, bodies burned, ashes disposed of, and the cycle repeats. At its peak, in mid-1944, during the deportation of Hungary's Jews, Auschwitz-Birkenau kills up to 6,000 people per day and struggles to keep up with cremation. Open-air pits are used to burn excess bodies when the ovens can't cope. By the war's end, an estimated 1.1 million people have been murdered at Auschwitz, almost all Jews, with some 75,000 Poles, 20,000 Roma, and a few thousand others among them. The extermination camps are kept as secret as possible. They are usually in remote areas, and the SS uses code language to discuss them. Victims are told they are going to resettlement or special camps. Official reports speak of special treatment, Sonderbehandlung, as a euphemism for killing. Local populations sometimes notice strange things, foul-smelling smoke from Berlinka, for instance, or the stench from Beljak's mass graves, but anyone who pries is threatened or dealt with. The Nazis go to great lengths to conceal their genocide. By late 1943, when they have largely completed the murder of Jews in Poland and the Soviet territories, they dismantle the 3 Operation Reinhard camps, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka. They plow over the sites, plant trees or crops to hide any trace. They force Jewish laborers to exhume mass graves and burn bodies as part of a covert operation codenamed Action 1005 to destroy evidence of the mass shootings in the east at Auschwitz. They keep the killing operation going into late 1944, but as the Soviet army approaches in January 1945, the SS hurriedly blow up the gas chambers and crematoria to hide what they've done. Despite these efforts at secrecy, information does leak out. By 1942, Polish underground reports reach the West, describing mass killings of Jews. In 1944, 2 prisoners, Rudolf Verber and Alfred Wetzler, famously escaped from Auschwitz and write a detailed report that reaches Allied authorities, revealing the gassing of hundreds of thousands at that camp. Some people find such news hard to believe at first. It sounds beyond monstrous, and indeed, only when the camps are liberated will the full truth be confirmed indisputably. Now, let us pause and take stock of where we are in this story. Calmly, we have reached the darkest heart of the Nazi camp system, the organized, bureaucratic genocide of human beings. What began in 1933 as a way to intimidate and punish political opponents has, by 194-21944, become a mechanism to annihilate entire populations. The concentration camps have been joined by extermination camps. Together, they operate as a coordinated nightmare apparatus across German-occupied Europe. By late 1944, the war is turning against Germany. The Allied armies are closing in. The Nazi leadership, in desperation, tries both to accelerate the killing and to erase the evidence of their crimes. Even in the midst of this state-orchestrated terror, however, acts of resistance and courage glimmer like faint stars in a night sky. One might think that in such conditions, hope or defiance would be snuffed out entirely, and indeed it was almost impossible. Yet there were prisoners who tried to fight back or retain their humanity in various ways. Resistance in the camps took different forms. On the quiet, everyday level, there was the resistance of spirit, a prisoner sharing bread with a friend despite starving himself, secretly saying prayers or observing religious rituals, such as whispering Hebrew prayers on holy days in Auschwitz, risking punishment, or recording camp events in a hidden diary, or by scratching notes and burying them. Some of these testimonies would later be found. These were acts that, though small, asserted the prisoner's will to remain human and sane. There were also instances of more open defiance. Rarely, prisoners organized armed uprisings or escape attempts, a nearly suicidal endeavor, but born of desperation and bravery. One of the most notable occurred at Treblinka on August 10, 1943. By then, Treblinka had been operating for over a year and had already killed hundreds of thousands of people. A group of the Jewish slave laborers there who knew the camp was likely to be shut down soon, and they themselves killed to eliminate witnesses, decided to die fighting. They managed to steal some weapons, a few rifles, grenades and pistols from the camp armory, smuggled out by an underground group of prisoners who had positions of trust. In the early afternoon, they set their plan into motion. Prisoners set fire to some camp buildings as a diversion and attacked the SS and Ukrainian guards. Gunfire erupted. Amid the chaos and flames, about 200 prisoners broke out of the camp fence and ran into the woods. Most were hunted down in the following days by German search patrols. Only around 70 made it past the initial pursuit, and of those perhaps 40 survived the war. But the revolt disrupted the camp's operations permanently and showed incredible courage. Not long after, Treblinka was closed and dismantled. The Nazis, having almost completed their murderous task in that area, were already planning to shut it down, and the prisoner uprising hastened that closure. Another extraordinary instance was the uprising at Sobibor extermination camp on October 14, 1943. There, a small cadre of Jewish prisoners, led by Polish Jewish prisoner Leon Feldhendler and a Soviet Jewish POW Alexander Pechersky, carefully planned an escape. They too realized the Nazis intended to kill them soon, as the camp's work was nearly done. In a feat of clandestine coordination, and imagine the difficulty of secret meetings under constant watch, they organized for each of several SS officers to be quietly eliminated at a set time. On the afternoon of the revolt, prisoners lured SS men one by one into workshops and, under the pretext of trying on new boots or checking work, and assassinated them with axes and knives. About 11 SS personnel were killed before the alarm was raised. As shots rang out, the camp went into panic and the prisoners ran for their lives, cutting or climbing the wire fences. Of Sobibor's roughly 600 prisoners, around 300 made it out of the camp into the surrounding minefields and forests. Sadly, many were recaptured or killed by pursuing Nazi forces and local collaborators. In the end, about 50-60 Sobibor escapees managed to survive until war's end. Yet this breakout stands as a powerful act of collective defiance. Prisoners with virtually no arms managed to destroy a death camp. The Nazis closed Sobibor entirely shortly after the revolt. At Auschwitz itself, where security was extremely tight, open revolt was even more difficult, but it happened. On October 7th, 1944, the Sonderkommando, the special group of prisoners forced to burn bodies at Crematorium 4 in Birkenau, rose up. By that time, they were well aware that their own liquidation was imminent. The SS periodically killed and replaced Sonderkommando members to maintain secrecy. Using explosives that had been smuggled to them over months by brave Jewish women working in a nearby munitions factory, women like Rosa Robota and others, who at great risk passed tiny amounts of gunpowder out to male prisoners, they blew up one of the crematorium buildings. In the melee, the Sonderkommando attacked the SS with stones, makeshift weapons, and desperation. Crematorium 4 was heavily damaged by the blast and rendered inoperable. The prisoners then tried to escape from the camp, but they were surrounded. Most, about 250 Sonderkans, were killed in the fight or executed shortly after. A few might have slipped away in the confusion, but very few. The SS brutally tortured and executed the women who had supplied the gunpowder too. The revolt was quelled, but it did succeed in destroying one of Birkenau's gas chambers and killing several SS men. In the annals of Auschwitz, where over 1 million were murdered, this one act of armed resistance is a shining, if tragic, testament to the indomitable human urge to fight oppression, even in the face of certain death. Beyond organized revolts, there were countless individual escape attempts. A few succeeded. For example, in April 1944, 2 Slovak Jewish prisoners, as mentioned, escaped Auschwitz, with detailed information there Reports saved lives by prompting warnings to Hungary, though not enough. In other camps, a handful of prisoners managed to slip into civilian clothes and sneak out during labor outside or hide in supply trucks. Every escape was extremely dangerous. If an escape was detected, the SS might torture or execute 10 other inmates as retaliation. Still, knowing this, some prisoners still dared. A Polish army officer, Witold Pelowski, even voluntarily got himself imprisoned in Auschwitz in 1940 to gather intelligence for the Allies, then escaped in 1943 to report on what he'd witnessed, an astounding story of courage and initiative. There are also small acts of sabotage as resistance. In war production factories, some prisoners would deliberately assemble parts incorrectly or mix less cement in concrete or subtly damage equipment. They did so at enormous risk. Sabotage was punished by execution, but it was a way to fight the Nazi cause with whatever means they had. Interpersonal dynamics in the camps were complex. The Nazis had set up a hierarchy that pitted prisoners against each other to an extent, giving a minority slightly better treatment and power over others as capos and blockheaders. Some of those prisoner functionaries, as we noted, became cruel tools of the SS, relishing the power or simply doing anything to survive. They could be as brutal to fellow inmates as the SS, yet others in those positions tried in subtle ways to ease suffering. A capo might overlook a minor rule violation rather than punish it, or a block elder might distribute an extra ladle of soup to the weakest in his block at the risk of being caught. Prisons often remembered both the cruelty of some comrades and the kindness of others. Psychologically, living in the camps was an extreme test. Many prisoners spoke of a numbness that would set in, an emotional shutdown as a coping mechanism. They saw so much death and cruelty that at times they could hardly react. Some prisoners did whatever it took to survive, even if it meant hurting others, stealing food from a dying bunkmate, for instance. In the camps, they coined the term Musulman, a slang term, not a real Muslim. It meant someone who had given up, a motionless, emaciated person waiting for death. These Musulmana were all too common in the barracks, people who had lost the will, who no longer responded even when beaten. Maintaining one's humanity was incredibly hard. Still, many did. Prisoners formed friendships like brotherhoods and sisterhoods. They taught each other little tricks to endure, how to tuck your wooden clogs with paper to prevent blisters, how to secretly gather crumbs to make a tiny extra meal, how to keep hope by whispering about seeing one's family again. Spiritual resistance occurred too. Religious inmates held furtive prayer meetings or saved tiny scraps of scripture to read. In Auschwitz, on the eve of Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, in 1944, some groups of Jewish prisoners fasted and prayed in defiance of camp rules, asserting their faith under the shadow of the chimneys. A particularly moving example of selflessness in the camps is the story of Father Maximilian Kolbe at Auschwitz. In July 1941, after a prisoner escaped from Kolbe's barracks, the SS decided to punish the whole group by selecting 10 men to die by starvation, a common reprisal method. When one of the selected men cried out in despair about his wife and children, Father Kolbe, a Polish Catholic priest also imprisoned in that barrack, calmly stepped forward. He volunteered to take the place of the crying man. The SS, somewhat surprised, but not caring who died as long as the quota was met, agreed. Kolbe and 9 others were locked in a starvation cell. Over the next 2 weeks, as they received no food or water, Kolbe led the men in prayers and hymns. One by one, they succumbed. Kolbe was the last, still alive after 2 weeks of starvation and dehydration, and the SS ended his life with an injection of carbolic acid on August 14th, 1941. His sacrifice was later remembered by survivors and eventually honored by the Catholic Church. He was canonized a saint. In the dark annals of Auschwitz, Kolbe's act shines as an example of pure goodness, one person laying down his life for another. As 1944 turns into 1945, the war is clearly going against the Nazis. the Soviet Red Army is advancing rapidly from the east, and Western Allied forces, Americans, British, Canadians, French, are closing in from the west. The Nazi leadership, in its final frenzy, orders the camps in the occupied east to be evacuated, and the evidence of atrocities to be destroyed wherever possible. This leads to the horror of the death marches, starting in the summer of 1944 and intensifying in the brutal cold of winter 1945. The SS forces tens of thousands of prisoners out of camps like Auschwitz, Stutthof, Gross-Rosen, and many others, marching them westward into Germany and Austria. These forced marches are deadly. Imagine in January 1945, prisoners from Auschwitz, some 60,000 of them, being herded out in columns through the snow. They have little or no warm clothing. Many are barefoot or have only tattered shoes. They are already weak or ill. The guards push them to march dozens of kilometers a day. If someone falls or cannot continue, a guard immediately steps forward and shoots them in the head, leaving the body by the road. At night, the prisoners might huddle in barns or open fields with no shelter or fire. Many freeze to death. A survivor later recalls that on one such march, the night sky was red in the distance from the burning camp. The air was bitterly cold, and the road behind them was dotted with the corpses of those who had fallen, like mile markers on the path of misery, he said quietly. Villagers along the route sometimes witnessed these skeletal, shuffling columns passing by. On occasion, a sympathetic local person might surreptitiously leave out a bucket of water or toss a piece of bread toward the prisoners, despite the risk of being shot by the guards for doing so. Such small acts of courage and kindness were rare, but they did occur and meant the world to those who received that life-saving sip of water or bite of food. The death marches continue into April 1945. Some groups march all the way from Poland or the Baltics into the heart of Germany. Many prisoners did not survive these treks. It's estimated that along the evacuation marches from various camps, tens of thousands more people died or were killed. For the SS, it was a way to prevent live prisoners from falling into Allied hands where they could testify, and also to continue using whatever labor they could until the last moment. Finally, in the spring of 1945, the liberation of the camps begins. The Soviet army is the first to reach a major camp, Majdanek, near Lublin, Poland, in July 1944, catching the Nazis somewhat by surprise. In their haste, the Germans had only partially destroyed Majdanek, so the Soviets liberate it largely intact, finding the gas chambers and crematoria there, and huge storehouses filled with belongings, including tens of thousands of shoes taken from victims. It is an early shock to those who witness it. Although Soviet reports about Majdanek's horrors are initially met with some skepticism in the West, the scale seems unbelievable. They are completely true. The liberation of Majdanek marks the world's first glimpse, via journalists, of a death camp in operation. Fast forward to January 27th, 1945, Soviet troops enter Auschwitz. Most of the prisoners, around 60,000, had been forced out on a death march days earlier, but about 7,000 sick and emaciated people remain, left behind in the chaos. The Red Army soldiers, battle-hardened and accustomed to bloodshed, are nonetheless stunned by what they find. Piles of unburied corpses, masses of prisoner clothing and personal items, warehouses filled with hundreds of thousands of men's suits, women's dresses, shoes, toothbrushes, the plunder of the murdered, and human beings who look more like skeletons huddled in barracks. The liberators do what they can, giving food, calling for medical units. Famously, upon seeing the survivors, one Soviet officer assures them, "You are free now," and many prisoners weep, laugh, or simply stand dumbfounded, too weak to comprehend. January 27th, the day of Auschwitz's liberation, is later commemorated as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. In the West, Allied forces begin liberating camps a few months later as they push into Germany. In April 1945, American troops reach Buchenwald in Germany and Dachau, the original camp, near Munich, among others. British troops liberate Bergen-Belsen in northern Germany on April 15th, 1945. The scenes that greet the Allied liberators are uniformly ghastly, though each camp has its own character. At Bergen-Belsen, the British find a camp with no gas chambers, but tens of thousands of prisoners dying of typhus, dysentery, and starvation. Around 13,000 corpses lie unburied on the camp grounds, and some 60,000 survivors are there, most in terribly advanced stages of malnutrition and disease. The smell alone is overwhelming. A British officer, trying to describe it, falters and says it was a stench that would haunt him forever. Emaciated survivors with sunken eyes and tattered clothes wander or lie motionless among the dead. Many are too weak to stand or even to eat if food is offered. The British immediately bring in medical units and supplies, but despite their best efforts, in the first weeks after liberation, another 10,000 of the Belsen survivors die. They were simply too far gone. The liberators do what they can. They distribute water and food carefully, learning that giving a starving person too much rich food at once can be fatal. They evacuate those who can be saved to field hospitals, and they burn down the entire infested camp after moving people out to prevent the spread of typhus. The British also force local German civilians to come and help bury the dead, making them confront what had been happening in their vicinity. At Buchenwald, the Americans find around 20,000 inmates alive. The prisoners had actually taken control of the camp shortly before, as the SS guards fled. A resistance organization inside Buchenwald, composed of political prisoners, managed to seize the armory and maintain order until US soldiers arrived. The Americans are nonetheless horrified by the evidence of atrocity. They see the crematorium with stacks of charred remains. They see the little camp area full of starving, diseased inmates. One American radio journalist, Edward R. Morrow, reports from Buchenwald in a famous broadcast, speaking in a shaken voice as he describes patients who looked like hell and saying, "If I have offended you by this rather mild account of Buchenwald, I'm not in the least sorry." His typically eloquent words failing as he struggles to convey the indescribable. At Dachau, American troops come upon railway cars filled with decomposing bodies, prisoners evacuated from elsewhere and left to die in transport. Inside the camp, they see heaps of bodies by the crematorium. Anger swells among the liberators. There is an incident where some American soldiers execute a number of captured SS camp guards on the spot, unable to contain their rage at what they've witnessed, though this was not officially condoned. Throughout April and early May 1945, camp after camp is liberated. Sachsenhausen and Ravensbrück by the Soviets, Neuengamme, Mauthausen, Flossenburg, Nordhausen, Dora Mittelbau by the Americans, Neuengamme and Bergen-Belsen by the British, and many smaller satellite camps as well. Allied medics and nurses pour into these places, confronting scenes that one doctor described as the visual evidence of pure evil. They work tirelessly to save whom they can. They bathe the survivors. Some prisoners feel fearful when asked to take a shower by Allied nurses. That word has a terrible connotation now, and have to be reassured it's safe. They delouse everyone to halt disease. They set up feeding schedules with thin gruels to slowly nurture bodies back to life. There is compassion in every gesture. A soldier wrapping a liberated inmate in a warm blanket, a nurse carefully spoon-feeding a skeletal woman who can barely open her mouth, doctors performing emergency care on the brink of the typhus epidemic. Survivors later remember these acts of kindness as almost unbelievable. After years of being treated as subhuman, to be cared for gently felt like a dream. Not everyone can be saved, despite the Allies' best efforts, but those who survive the first days gradually realize the nightmare is over. Still, liberation is not a simple happy ending for the survivors. In the initial days, many liberated prisoners are in a daze. They often cannot fully absorb that they are free. Some continue to hoard bits of bread or steal extra food and hide it under their mattress, habits formed from extreme deprivation that don't vanish overnight. Some are afraid to leave the camp area even when gates are opened. The known world of the camp, hellish as it was, became their universe, and stepping outside is psychologically daunting. Allied soldiers sometimes have to gently persuade them, You can walk through the gate. Really, you're free to go. And it takes time for that reality to sink in. For a long time after liberation, many survivors remain in limbo. They have no homes to return to. Whole families and communities are wiped out, homes destroyed or occupied by others. They become displaced persons, DPs, living in temporary camps set up by the Allies on military bases, or former camps. In these DP camps, survivors slowly regain strength and begin to piece together their shattered lives. They search desperately for loved ones. There are bulletin boards where people post lists of names, hoping to find a missing wife, a child, a brother. In most cases, they are met with sorrow. The person they seek has perished. But occasionally, a miraculous reunion occurs. A husband and wife find each other after each had presumed the other dead, or siblings meet by chance in a registration line. Such moments of joy are rare, but poignant beyond words. Within the DP camps, life starts to take on normal aspects again. Schools are organized for child survivors. Little newspapers and newsletters are printed so people can keep track of news. Religious services are held openly. If you walked into a DP camp in late 1945, you might see a group of survivors celebrating a wedding. Yes, many marriages took place as people clung to life and hope. Some even finding love amid the survivors. You might hear songs in Yiddish or Polish or other languages, as survivors compose music about their experiences or resurrected folk songs that had been nearly lost. There is trauma and grief, of course. Nearly everyone has lost family and is haunted by memories, but there is also a profound determination to live. Emaciated faces fill out, weak individuals grow stronger. Babies are born to mothers who thought they might never have children after what they endured. In short, the survivors begin, slowly, quietly, the work of living again. For the wider world, as the camps are liberated, a new chapter begins. The chapter of bearing witness and seeking justice. Allied forces film and photograph the camps extensively to document the atrocities. These images and newsreels soon circle the globe, leaving viewers horrified and incredulous that such things were possible. American General Dwight Eisenhower, after visiting Ohrdruf, a subcamp of Buchenwald, famously says he made a point to be an eyewitness because I wanted to be in a position to give first-hand evidence of these things in case there ever grows up at home the belief that these stories are just propaganda. The truth of the camps is laid bare for all to see. In May 1945, the war in Europe ends with Nazi Germany's defeat. The guns fall silent. But the end of the fighting is not the end of the story of the camps. Now comes the process of justice and reckoning. The world has to confront exactly what happened and hold the perpetrators accountable. Soon after the war, the Allies organized the major Nuremberg trials, 19451-946, where top Nazi leaders are prosecuted. In that grand courtroom, much evidence of the Holocaust and concentration camps is presented. The scale of the crimes is quantified. Roughly 6 million Jewish men, women and children were systematically murdered by the Nazi regime, and millions of others, including Polish and Soviet civilians, Roma and Sinti, political dissidents, disabled persons and prisoners of war, were also victims of Nazi racial and political persecution. These numbers are almost beyond comprehension, yet the evidence supports them. At Nuremberg, prosecutors show films of the camps as they were found and enter thousands of captured Nazi documents into the record. Witnesses testify, including camp survivors and even some perpetrators. One witness is Rudolf Hoss, the former commandant of Auschwitz, who testifies with chilling detachment about how many people were gassed under his supervision. Over 1 million at Auschwitz, he confirmed. Terms like crimes against humanity are used for the first time to legally define what the Nazis did. The world hears in grim detail about the gas chambers, the mass shootings, the human experiments, and the slave labor. Several major Nazi figures like Hermann Goering, Joachim von Ribbentrop, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, among others, are convicted of these crimes. Some are sentenced to death, though Goering cheats the hangman by committing suicide in his cell. Others receive long prison terms. The Nuremberg trials establish a precedent that such atrocities will not go unpunished and create an irrefutable record of what happened. Beyond Nuremberg, there are many other trials in the following years. The Western Allies each conduct trials in their occupation zones of Germany. The Americans hold the Dachau trials, prosecuting hundreds of lower-level camp officials and guards from Dachau, Mauthausen, Buchenwald, and other camps liberated by US forces. The British hold the Belsen trial to prosecute staff from Bergen-Belsen and also from Auschwitz, since some of the personnel served at both. In that trial, notorious individuals like Josef Kramer, the commandant of Belsen, nicknamed the Beast of Belsen, and Irma Grieser, a cruel young female guard from Auschwitz and Belsen, are found guilty and executed. The Soviet and Polish authorities likewise conduct trials. For instance, the Auschwitz trial in Krakow, 1947, where Rudolf Hoss and others are convicted. Hoss is executed on the grounds of Auschwitz, near his former villa, an act rich in symbolism. In all, hundreds of Nazi perpetrators of the camp system are punished in the immediate post-war years, though many others managed to slip away or live under false identity. Through these legal processes, an astonishing amount of information is made public. Survivors come forward to testify, recounting the agonies they suffered. Investigators pore over meticulous Nazi camp records for the Nazis. In their warped way, kept detailed books, prisoner registers, death logs with fake causes listed, train arrival schedules, construction blueprints for gas chambers labeled as bathhouses, etc. All of this becomes evidence. It not only convicts the guilty, but it educates the global public about the reality of the camps. Newspapers at the time print column after column describing the proceedings. The world slowly comes to know the full truth. Beyond the initial shocking images, people start to understand that what happened was systematic, state-organized, and on an almost unimaginable scale. The phrase "never again" begins to circulate as a hope and principle. Never again should such things be allowed to happen. Yet, even with evidence and verdicts, comprehension is difficult. Many struggle to wrap their minds around the Holocaust. How could a cultured nation like Germany produce this? How could ordinary men run gas chambers and shoot babies? These questions disturb and puzzle people for generations to come. In the immediate post-war period, many folks, especially in war-torn Europe, are busy rebuilding their lives, and there is a tendency to want to move forward, perhaps not dwell too long on the horrors. Thus, for a time, the detailed discussion of the camps and genocide somewhat recedes into the background of everyday life, except for those who experienced it directly. For camp survivors, the post-war period is a new battle, a battle to recover and to be heard. They carry deep physical and psychological scars. Many suffer from what we today call PTSD. They have nightmares, flashbacks, anxieties. At night, they might bolt awake in sweat, imagining they are back in a barrack or hearing a guard's footsteps. Some survivors feel intense survivor's guilt, the painful question of why they lived while so many others, including loved ones, did not. This burden can be heavy. Survivors often describe an emptiness or a sense that part of them remained in those camps with the dead. Despite these challenges, a remarkable number of survivors display resilience and go on to build meaningful lives. In the displaced persons camps and later in new home countries such as the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, Israel, and elsewhere, survivors often seek out community. Many marry and have children, creating new families to replace, in a way, what was lost, a quiet victory against the Nazi attempt to destroy them. Others pour their energy into educating the world. They write memoirs like Primo Levi's If This Is a Man or Elie Wiesel's Night, or give testimony in whatever forums become available. Some remain silent for decades, not ready to relive the trauma. Only in their old age do they speak out, when they sense time is running short and the world must know their stories. In the first decade or so after the war, broader society is not always receptive to these survivor stories. People are rebuilding, focusing on the future, and many do not wish to dwell on the ghastly past. Survivors sometimes sense disbelief or discomfort when they try to tell others about what they endured. A common reaction they encounter is, "How terrible, but now it's over, you must forget and move on." Of course, forgetting is impossible for them. Some survivors thus keep their experiences to themselves for a long time, sharing only with fellow survivors who truly understand. Nevertheless, remembrance begins in small ways. Former prisoners' associations form. They hold gatherings and commemorate the dead. In 1948, on the site of the former Dachau camp, a group of survivors establish a memorial with the words "Never Again" in several languages. At Auschwitz, the Polish government in 1947 preserves the site as a museum. They leave many of the barracks standing, display the piles of shoes and hair collected by the Nazis, and erect memorials. In France, at Struthof, Natzweiler, and Oradour, site of a massacre, people create memorial centers even as early as the late 1940s. Throughout Europe, there are dozens of modest monuments unveiled in the 1950s at former campsites or in towns to honor deported citizens. In the 1960s, public focus on the Holocaust and the camps intensifies again. A key moment is the 1961 trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. Eichmann, a major organizer of the deportations, had been captured in Argentina and brought to Israel. His trial is one of the first times survivors speak about their ordeal on a widely broadcast stage. It's carried on television and millions around the world see and hear them. Their testimonies about cattle cars and selections and gas chambers profoundly affect international audiences and galvanize a new generation to learn about what happened. In West Germany around the same time, there are the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials, 1963 to 65, where German courts prosecute mid-level staff of Auschwitz. This trial is actually widely covered and forces German society to confront the details of Auschwitz, which many younger Germans knew little about. From these points on, Holocaust education and commemoration grow significantly. Survivors like Simon Wiesenthal dedicate their lives to tracking down fugitive war criminals and ensuring history isn't rewritten. Writers like Elie Wiesel, Primo Levi, and Viktor Frankl publish works that become standard reading. Films and documentaries begin to tackle the subject, e.g. the 1978 miniseries Holocaust, the 1985 documentary Shoah. While dramatizations are sometimes imperfect, they elevate awareness. Terms like Auschwitz enter the common lexicon as shorthand for human evil. Memory takes physical form at the sites of former camps. Many camps by the late 20th century have been turned into formal memorials and museums. Visitors often walk through them in silence, as if through an outdoor church of sorrow. They see the intact crematoriums at Majdanek, the ruins of gas chambers at Auschwitz, the guard towers at Dachau, the reconstructed barracks at Buchenwald. Plaques in multiple languages explain what happened on that very ground. For example, at Auschwitz-Birkenau, one can stand at the rail platform where so many arrived and see the remains of crematoria 2 and 3 in the distance. It is eerily quiet there now, often with birds chirping, nature reclaiming a place of unnatural death. And visitors commonly feel an almost sacred hush as they reflect on the lives that were lost. Survivors and their descendants are heavily involved in these memorial efforts. Each year, on certain anniversaries, they gather at the camps. At Dachau, survivors or their children might light candles and recite the names of those who died. At Treblinka's memorial, where nothing remains of the camp but a field of stone shards symbolizing lost communities, people leave flowers and say Kaddish, the Jewish prayer for the dead. These acts are both personal and communal. They turn sites of atrocity into places of mourning and warning. Internationally, governments establish official days of remembrance. Many countries observe Holocaust Memorial Day on January 27th, the date Auschwitz was liberated. On that day, ceremonies are held in parliaments, schools, and public squares. Candles are lit, often 6 of them, to represent the 6 million Jews killed. Names of victims might be read aloud in a somber roll call of the dead. bringing individuals out of the faceless mass. In Israel, Yom HaShoah is commemorated on a date in spring. Sirens sound throughout the country, and people stop whatever they are doing, even stop their cars on highways, to stand in silence for 2 minutes in honor of the victims. It's a powerful collective pause. All of these efforts, memorials, ceremonies, education, aim at not only honoring those who suffered and died, but also teaching future generations. When students learn about the Holocaust in school now, they often learn through personal stories. The diary of Anne Frank, for example, has introduced millions of young readers to the human impact of the camps, since Anne died of typhus in Bergen-Belsen after surviving Auschwitz for a time. Teachers show children drawings made by kids in Theresienstadt ghetto camp, or play testimony videos of survivors describing daily life in a camp. It can be difficult, heavy material, but it's often taught with care, emphasizing the importance of tolerance and human rights as lessons drawn from the past. Indeed, the revelation of what happened in the Nazi camps influenced the creation of modern human rights laws and principles. In 1948, as mentioned, the newly formed United Nations passed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, establishing that all humans have certain inherent rights, a response to the way the camps utterly denied human dignity. Also in 1948 came the Genocide Convention, defining genocide as a crime under international law, the direct result of recognizing the Holocaust. The term genocide itself was coined during the war in 1944 by a Polish Jewish lawyer, Raphael Lemkin, specifically to describe the policies like those that led to the camps and mass killings. The world said, at least on paper, that never again would it stand by and allow such systematic destruction of a people. Of course, reality has not fully lived up to that promise. There have been other genocides and atrocities since, Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, etc. But awareness of the Holocaust has often served as a reference point for activists and leaders when responding to later crises. People will invoke the camps when warning about the dangers of unchecked hatred. Phrases like, "we must act," or "else we are no better than those who watched trains to Auschwitz pass by," are used to galvanize act. The memory of the camps thus has become a kind of moral compass for many, a stark example of where racism and anti-Semitism can lead if not resisted. Now, as our gentle narration nears its conclusion, close your eyes and imagine standing in one of those now quiet places of remembrance. Perhaps you are at the edge of an Auschwitz ruins, or inside the preserved barrack at Dachau, where faint sunlight filters through dusty windows. It's peaceful and silent there now. Only the echoes of history remain. In your mind, you walk along the path that prisoners once marched, but now it is just you, perhaps hearing birds and the wind. You reflect on all that happened, the enormity of it, the millions of lives lost. It's painful, but you also recall the small stories of courage, a prisoner sharing bread, an inmate whispering a prayer, an escape that carried evidence to the world, a rebel attack on the oppressor. In this quiet reflection, you realize that even in humanity's darkest chapters, there were glimmers of light. We have traveled together from the early years of Nazi rule, when the first camps were set up to crush dissent, through the expansion of the camp system and the depths of planned genocide, and finally to the liberation and aftermath. We have heard about everyday life under tyranny, the roll calls in the cold dawn, the scraps of food, the arbitrary punishments, and we have also considered how people survived, resisted, and later remembered. It has been a long and somber journey, but moving through it steadily and calmly has allowed us to truly absorb what happened and why it matters. The story of the Nazi concentration and extermination camps is one of the most difficult in human history. It shows the terrifying extremes of cruelty and hate. Yet, by learning about it in a gentle, measured way, as we have tonight, we perform an act of honor for those who suffered. We refuse to let their experiences be forgotten or denied. In doing so, we also take to heart the lessons of where prejudice, racism, and authoritarianism can lead, if left unchecked. Each person who died in those camps had a name, a face, a story, a life cut short. We remember them as individuals, the mothers, fathers, children, grandparents, the teachers, the musicians, the workers, the rabbis and priests, the lovers, the dreamers. Remembering them restores a bit of the dignity that the camp system tried to strip away. We also honor the survivors, those who, through fate or fortitude, emerged alive and carried the burden of memory for the rest of their days. Many of them, despite their trauma, chose to better the world by sharing their stories, by fostering understanding among people, by simply living well and kindly as a rebuttal to the hatred that sought to destroy them. And we pay tribute to the liberators and witnesses, soldiers, doctors, journalists who bore witness to the truth and passed it to us. Because of them, the world could not as easily brush aside these events. They made sure the evidence was preserved, the mass graves respectfully handled, the survivors cared for, and the cry of never again raised. Now, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and feel the quiet around you. You are here, in a far safer and gentler world, listening to this story in the dark, perhaps with the comfort of your pillow and blanket. The horrors we described are in the past. By hearing about them, you have performed an act of remembrance. In your calm, safe space, you have carried the torch of memory forward. As you prepare to drift into sleep, let the weight of this history slowly lift from your mind, leaving behind understanding and resolve. The past cannot be changed. Those events did happen, and many innocent lives were lost. But the future is ours to protect. By remembering the depths to which humanity can sink, we also remind ourselves of the heights to which we must aspire. Compassion, tolerance, vigilance against injustice. Feel your breathing, slow and steady. With each breath out, release any tension this story might have brought. With each breath in, invite a sense of peace and thankfulness. Peace that such a nightmarish era is over, and thankfulness for the quiet safety of your own bed in the here and now. Close your eyes and imagine all those souls at last at rest, and you, alive in a world that has learned from the past. You are safe, the night is calm, the story, though heavy, has been shared and heard, and in doing so, we keep its lessons alive. Let that knowledge settle gently in your mind, and now, before you drift off to sleep, let yourself sit quietly for just a moment. Think of those who lived and suffered in silence, those who waited, endured, hoped, and those who never left. If you feel it in your heart, offer a thought, a breath, or even a prayer for all the lives lost in that cold machinery of forgetting. Sleep gently, and remember, good night, and may you sleep in peace.